Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never questioned what they were really teaching you? When I was a kid, my father was everything to me. He was the kind of man who didn't need many words. His silence carried its own authority. People in town said he was strict, distant, maybe even cold, but to me, he was a figure of strength. Every gesture, every lesson felt like part of some greater truth I wasn't yet old enough to understand. He used to say, "The forest teaches what the world tries to hide." At the time, I thought it was just one of his strange sayings, something poetic that fathers tell their sons. But later, I'd realize it wasn't poetry at all. It was warning disguised as wisdom. I still remember those nights in the woods, the air thick with mist, the sound of leaves cracking beneath our boots, the faint smell of gun oil and damp earth. My father moved like he belonged there, steady, deliberate, almost reverent. He told me to watch, to listen, to breathe with the rhythm of the forest. He said that patience was the difference between a hunter and the hunted. As a boy, I followed him through that darkness, my small hands gripping the flashlight, my heartbeat echoing louder than the wind. He'd stop sometimes, kneel down, and point to a trail of prints in the mud. "What do you see?" he'd ask. I'd guess. Deer, maybe a fox, but he'd only smile. That quiet kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He made the forest feel alive, like it was watching us as much as we were watching it. And in those moments, I believed he was teaching me about survival, about courage, about understanding fear. You ever had someone teach you something so intensely that it left an imprint on your soul? That was him. Everything I know about silence, about observation, about reading people. I learned it there under the cover of trees and moonlight. But there were small things, little details, that I never thought much about until years later. The way he always avoided hunting during the day. How he'd come home without any game, yet call the night a success. How he'd clean his tools with such precision. It felt more like ritual than routine. As a kid, I thought that was just who he was, meticulous, disciplined. But sometimes I caught glimpses of something else in his expression, a satisfaction that didn't match the story he told. When you grow up, you start to question the memories that shaped you. You start to see things that your younger self couldn't. Looking back now, I realize those nights weren't about hunting animals. They were about control, about learning to dominate, to outsmart, to anticipate. And my father, he wasn't just teaching me how to survive the world. He was shaping me in his image, even if I didn't understand it then. Still, I admired him. I think I always will, in some strange, conflicted way. Even when I drifted away, even when I stopped going into the woods, there was a part of me that still heard his voice, steady, patient, echoing in my mind every time I faced something unknown. The forest teaches what the world tries to hide. It sounded profound back then. Now, it feels like a secret I was never meant to uncover. Maybe that's why, after he was gone, I couldn't resist going back. To the forest, to the old tools, to the silence that once felt like home. What I found there would change everything I thought I knew about him and about myself. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might make you look differently at the people you think you know best. And maybe you felt that too. This strange pull toward something you can't explain, some echo from your past that refuses to fade. If what I'm saying stirs something in you, if it reminds you of someone you once trusted completely, I want to know. Tell me in the comments what this story makes you think of, or what it makes you feel. I read every message, and sometimes what you share helps shape the next story we tell here. This channel isn't just mine. It's a place for people who've seen the quiet, unsettling sides of ordinary life and still want to understand them. If this kind of story speaks to you, take a moment to like this video. It helps more than you might think. When you hit that button, it tells the algorithm that stories like this matter, that you want to hear more about the hidden truths we live with. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. Each week, we explore moments that look familiar on the surface, but carry something darker underneath. Stories that remind us how fragile trust can be, how easily love and fear can share the same home. Your presence here is what keeps these stories alive. The comments, the likes, the people who come back episode after episode, that's what builds this strange little community of ours, where we can look at the things most people avoid and try to make sense of them together. So, if this has reached you in some way, if you've ever questioned what someone close to you is really capable of, stay with me. Because what comes next, it might make you see the word family in a way you never have before. There was always something sacred about those nights. My father treated every hunt as if it were a ritual, a ceremony only he truly understood. Before the sun went down, he'd start preparing in silence. The smell of metal polish and gun oil filled the air while he checked each weapon with mechanical precision. I remember the sound of the cloth sliding over the barrel, the rhythmic clicks of the safety locks, the faint hum he made under his breath, a sound that almost resembled prayer. He said the forest rewarded those who respected it, and for him, respect meant control. He'd hand me the flashlight and tell me to keep my breathing steady. Like the trees, he used to say, the forest listens. And I believed it. I believed every word that came out of his mouth. I learned to move without making a sound, to read the ground like a story, broken twigs, scattered feathers, a print barely visible in the mud. He could tell the weight, the age, even the fear of the creature that had passed by. "Look at the eyes," he'd whisper whenever we cornered something. "You'll see the truth right before the end." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant, only that he looked alive in a way I had never seen him before. Those moments were heavy with anticipation. The night pressed against us like a living thing, and even the air seemed to wait for his next move. I tried to impress him, to prove that I was learning, that I could be like him. He never praised me, not with words, but sometimes when the hunt was done, he'd put his hand on my shoulder, firm, unshaking, and that was enough. That gesture felt like acceptance, like I was becoming part of something important. Yet, beneath that warmth, there was always a current of unease, a faint whisper of something wrong. He never spoke about what we hunted afterward. Once the night was over, it was as if it had never happened. We'd walk back to the truck in silence, the world still half asleep, and he'd say only one thing before turning the key: "Good job, son." Then, the subject was buried beneath the sound of the engine and the hum of the tires against the dirt road. I'd look out the window at the trees fading behind us and feel both proud and uneasy, as if I had touched something sacred or forbidden. Years later, I'd catch myself missing those nights, even though I never truly understood them. The forest had become a place of memory, and memories have a way of changing shape when you revisit them. Sometimes I wonder if I ever actually saw what he saw. Maybe all I wanted was to be seen by him, to be recognized, to matter. That's the strange thing about love. It can blind you even when your instincts scream that something's off. The older I got, the more I noticed the look in his eyes. It wasn't just focus or thrill, it was hunger. He could stand perfectly still for minutes, barely breathing, watching something only he seemed to perceive. When the moment came, when he finally took the shot, there was this unsettling satisfaction on his face. Not relief. Satisfaction. I used to think it was pride. Now I'm not so sure. Looking back, I realized that those nights were less about learning to survive and more about learning to obey. The silence, the discipline, the rituals, they were all part of something larger, something he never named. Maybe it was about control, or maybe it was about understanding fear. Either way, I learned both at his side. It's strange how the human mind can turn trauma into tradition, how easily we inherit someone else's darkness without realizing it. Sometimes I wonder how much of him still lives in me, That stillness, that precision, that quiet fascination with the unknown. If you've ever felt that same conflict, loving someone who also frightened you, write the word silence in the comments, because that's where everything began for me. In the silence of the woods, where the truth hid just beneath the sound of our footsteps. With time, something inside me began to change. The forest no longer felt like a place of wisdom or mystery. It started to feel like a weight. The silence that once seemed sacred became suffocating. I left home for college, chasing the noise of the city, the rush of people, the illusion of normal life. I told myself I needed distance, that growing up meant learning to live beyond my father's shadow. For the first time, I stopped cleaning rifles, stopped smelling like pine and gunpowder, stopped waking before dawn to follow him into the trees. I wanted to breathe air that didn't taste like fear disguised as discipline. He didn't protest when I left. That was what hurt the most. He simply nodded, that same quiet acknowledgement he gave after every hunt, and said, "The forest will wait for you." At the time, I didn't know whether it was a blessing or a warning. He stayed behind, living in that old cabin at the edge of the woods, still going out every weekend with the same gear, the same precision. Sometimes when I'd call him, I could hear the forest behind his voice, the wind, the faint crackle of leaves. He sounded calm, almost peaceful, but there was always something hollow underneath, something I couldn't name. Life outside moved fast. I filled my days with deadlines and city lights, trying to forget the smell of the woods and the way his eyes lingered on shadows. I studied psychology, maybe unconsciously trying to understand him, or myself. They say you can't really leave where you come from. It follows you in the way you think, the way you love, the way you fear. And that was true for me. No matter how far I went, the lessons stayed. I'd catch myself reading people the same way he taught me to read tracks, noticing hesitation in their voices, fear in their posture, deception in their eyes. It was useful, yes, but also haunting. It made me realize that even in his absence, I was still walking his path. Every time I went home for the holidays, the distance between us felt wider. He'd sit across the table, hands steady, eyes sharp, as if studying something only he could see. He'd ask about my life, my work, my friends, always politely, never emotionally. The warmth I wanted was buried under layers of restraint. Still, there was love there, in his own way, a strange, cold love that demanded nothing but silence in return. I tried to tell him about the city, about the world beyond the trees, but his expression never changed. He'd just say, "The forest is everything you need, son." It was like speaking to a ghost tied to the soil. Sometimes, I thought about joining him again, just once, to remember, but something in me resisted. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the quiet awareness that some doors, once reopened, never close the same way again. He didn't stop, though. Every weekend, he disappeared into the same woods where he had once guided me, coming back with that same look of satisfaction, that same eerie calm. The neighbors would wave when he returned, his truck covered in dust, his expression unreadable. To them, he was just a lonely old man clinging to his routine. To me, he was a reminder of everything I was trying not to become. I told myself that the distance was healing us. That space would turn confusion into understanding. But time doesn't always bring clarity. Sometimes it only stretches the silence until it becomes unbearable. I sent letters that went unanswered, made calls that ended too soon. He was there, alive, consistent as the seasons, yet I felt like I had already lost him. Maybe it's strange to mourn someone who still breathes, but that's what it felt like. Each year that passed, I felt him fading further into that forest, as if the trees were slowly taking him back. There were nights in the city when I'd wake up to the sound of wind against my window and swear I could hear his voice, just a whisper, almost gentle, repeating that same line. The forest teaches what the world tries to hide. It lingered in my mind like an echo, unsettling yet comforting. I told myself it was just memory, the mind's way of clinging to what it can't resolve. But part of me knew the truth. That bond between us had never really broken. It had only gone quiet, waiting. And so, while I built a life of logic and distance, he stayed in his world of instinct and silence. Two different lives growing in opposite directions, yet bound by something neither of us could name. I thought I could escape what he'd given me. I thought knowledge would save me from inheritance. But blood remembers, and somewhere deep down I already knew that the forest, and whatever secrets it kept, wasn't done with me yet. When the call came, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. There was no dramatic collapse, no rush of tears, just a quiet, hollow pause, like the air had thickened for a moment and then moved on. They said my father passed peacefully, sitting in his chair by the window, as if the forest had simply called him back. He had no one else, no brothers, no friends left from the old days. So everything, the land, the tools, the cabin, came to me. It felt strange, inheriting a life I had spent years trying to escape. The drive back home felt endless. The city slowly disappeared behind me, replaced by the endless line of trees that framed the road like a tunnel into the past. Every turn brought a familiar ache, the smell of pine, the hum of insects, the damp scent of soil that always clung to him. When I parked in front of the house, the stillness was suffocating. The windows were dark, the porch light broken, and yet it felt as if something was still awake inside, waiting. Walking through the door, I was hit by the same smell I remembered from childhood, with smoke, old leather, gun oil. It was like stepping into a memory frozen in time. Everything was exactly as he left it. The coat by the door, the boots lined up in the corner, even the coffee mug on the table, half full, as if he might come back any second. I stood there for a long time, unsure whether to feel grief or guilt. Maybe both. Grief for the man I lost, guilt for the distance I created. But above all, there was something else. Unease. That feeling that some part of him was still there, watching, listening. It took me hours before I gathered the courage to open the door to the old hunting shed. The key was still on the hook by the back door, tied with the same leather strap he'd always used. My hands trembled when I touched it. I could almost hear his voice again, calm and steady, telling me to respect the space. The metal door creaked when I pushed it open, and a wave of cold air brushed my face. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through dusty windows, revealing shapes I could barely recognize at first. The racks of tools, the boxes stacked neatly against the wall, the familiar scent of oil and rust. It was just a room, but it didn't feel like one. There was a presence there, something thick in the air, as if the walls themselves held breath. I stood in silence, trying to understand the strange mixture of comfort and dread washing over me. Every object seemed to have its own story. The old lantern, the hooks, the knives lined up in order of size. His precision had always impressed me. Now it unsettled me. I told myself I'd clean the place, maybe turn it into something else. A workshop, maybe even a study. Something normal, something that could bury the past under fresh paint and purpose. I started small, wiping the dust from the workbench, organizing the scattered tools. The sound of metal against metal echoed through the shed, and every time I moved something, I half expected to hear footsteps behind me. It's funny how silence can make the mind create things that aren't there. But in that shed, it didn't feel imagined. It felt like the quiet had weight. As I worked, I noticed how everything was arranged with military precision. Labeled boxes, detailed notes written in his tight, controlled handwriting. It didn't surprise me. My father had always believed that order was a form of discipline. Still, there was something unnerving about the care he'd taken to preserve it all. The tools were spotless, as if they had been cleaned only days before, though no one had been there in months. Even the smell of oil was fresh. I kept moving, driven by an instinct I couldn't explain. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was curiosity, but part of me needed to make sense of what he'd left behind. I thought about how strange it was. How death doesn't really end a person's influence. It lingers in habits, in places, in the unspoken rules they leave behind. My father's silence had followed me all my life, and now, even in death, it filled the room like a ghost that refused to rest. There were moments when I stopped cleaning just to listen. The shed creaked softly, would settling against the cold. I could hear my own breathing, slow and careful, like it used to be when we hunted together. For a second, I almost whispered his name. Almost. But the word caught in my throat, because deep down, I wasn't sure who would answer. I remember stepping back and looking at the room again. The dust in the air shimmered through a beam of sunlight breaking through the cracked window, and for a moment, I could almost see him there, his shape, his posture, his steady eyes. It wasn't grief anymore. It was recognition that even in absence, he still had control of the space, and maybe, in some quiet way, control over me. I told myself I'd come back the next day to finish what I started. But as I locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just disturbed a memory. I'd awakened something that had been waiting all along. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, cutting narrow paths of gold across the floorboards. I hadn't slept much. My dreams were restless, full of whispers, shadows between trees, and that same cold presence I felt in the shed. Still, I forced myself to go back. Maybe I just needed closure. Maybe cleaning the place would finally silence whatever I'd been carrying all these years. The shed greeted me with that same thick stillness, the same scent of oil and dust. But now, the light was different, clearer, sharper. It illuminated things I hadn't noticed before. Along the far wall, beneath the workbench, there were several wooden boxes stacked in perfect alignment. They were numbered in my father's handwriting, black ink faded, but still legible, from 1 to 12. Each had a small metal latch, locked but not sealed. Something about the order, the precision, made my chest tighten. My father had never done anything without reason. I crouched down and ran my hand over the first box. The wood was smooth, recently polished, as if he had touched it not long before he died. The latch clicked open easily. Inside, wrapped in an old piece of cloth, were 3 objects: a rusted wedding ring, a worn leather wallet, and a handkerchief stained a deep, uneven brown. For a moment, I didn't move. The air seemed to close in around me, pressing against my skin. I unfolded the cloth completely, half expecting to find something that explained it all, a note, a memory, a reason. But there was nothing except a folded piece of paper beneath the handkerchief. It wasn't a letter. It was a newspaper clipping. The edges were yellowed, the ink smudged, but I could still make out the headline. Local woman missing. Search continues in County Woods. The date stopped me cold. It was from a weekend I remembered clearly, one of the last hunts I ever went on with him. I could still see the fog that morning, hear the crunch of frost beneath our boots, feel his hand on my shoulder when he whispered, "Today will be a good one." My throat went dry. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe he kept it out of concern, or as part of some collection of local stories. He'd always clipped newspaper articles about the town, weather reports, obituaries, even hunting contests. But this was different. The wallet felt heavy in my hand, as if it carried more than just its contents. I opened it carefully. Inside were a few faded photographs, a driver's license, and a small folded note that read, "Come home soon. The handwriting was delicate, hopeful. It made my stomach twist. I placed everything back the way I found it, almost ritualistically, like handling something sacred or forbidden. Then I noticed the number on the box again. 1. If this was the first, what about the others? My eyes moved across the stack, each identical, each sealed with the same precision. My pulse quickened. Rationally, I knew I should have stopped, closed the shed, walked away, but curiosity, or maybe fear, had its own kind of gravity. It pulled me forward. The second box was heavier. When I lifted the lid, the same musty smell escaped, mixed with something metallic. Inside was another set of personal objects, a silver bracelet, a pair of broken glasses, and a torn scarf. Beneath them, another clipping. Teenage hiker still missing after 3 days. Authorities expand search. The date matched another weekend, another hunt. My breath caught as I realized the pattern forming. Each box might represent a night we went into the forest. Each hunt might not have been what I thought it was. I sat on the floor, the boxes staring back at me like open wounds. The realization pressed hard against my chest. Memories I had buried under years of denial began to surface. The times he returned home empty-handed but satisfied, the faint marks on his sleeves, the way he avoided certain questions. I wanted to tell myself it wasn't true, that I was misreading everything, but the evidence was too deliberate, too methodical. These weren't keepsakes. They were trophies. The air inside the shed felt heavier now, colder. Even the sunlight through the window seemed to dim. I could hear the faint hum of insects outside, but in here there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the beating of my heart. It was then that I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small ledger tucked beneath the stack of boxes. Its cover was made of thick, dark leather, edges worn smooth by use. I opened it carefully. Each page was numbered, each entry dated. The handwriting was neat, exact, almost detached. Next to each date was a single phrase. Good job. It was his voice, his words, the same ones he whispered to me after every hunt. For years, I had carried them as a symbol of pride, a father's approval. Now, they sounded like something else entirely, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the noise of the forest and the illusion of love. I closed the ledger, my hands shaking. I wanted to leave, to step out into the sunlight and never come back. But a part of me, the part he had trained, shaped, disciplined, couldn't stop. Because if there were 12 boxes, it meant there was more to find, more to understand. And somehow, I already knew that the truth waiting in the last box would not only destroy the image I had of him, it would destroy what I believed about myself. I don't remember how long I sat there, surrounded by those boxes. The dust in the air looked almost alive, swirling through the thin lines of sunlight that crept in through the cracks. My hands were trembling, but I couldn't stop opening each lid. Every box felt heavier than the last, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Each box was numbered, each one contained personal belongings, and every one of them hid a newspaper clipping dated around the same weekends we had gone hunting. It hit me slowly, like a fever building beneath the skin. These weren't coincidences. Each object, each headline was a record, a ritual. My father hadn't been hunting deer or wolves. He'd been hunting people. The thought clawed its way into my chest and stayed there. I wanted to reject it, to believe I was wrong, but the evidence was too precise, too deliberate. He had documented everything with military order, names, dates, even weather notes scribbled in the margins of the ledger. Clear skies, easy trail. That's what one line said, written in his careful, emotionless handwriting. I started to remember the nights he came home from the woods alone, his boots caked in mud, his hands trembling just enough for me to notice. He would sit at the table, silent, eyes unfocused. Then, after a few minutes, he'd look at me and say the same words every time. "Good job, son." It used to sound like pride. Now, it sounded like confession. The further I went, the clearer the connection became. Each missing person matched a weekend, a place, a story I had lived beside without ever understanding. My father's calm, his strange satisfaction after each successful hunt, it all aligned with the nights I'd hear distant sirens or see headlines in the town paper. Back then, I never connected the two. How could I? He was my father, the man who taught me to track, to stay silent, to recognize fear. I thought he was teaching me survival, but what if all along he was teaching me something else? The air in the shed felt heavier with every discovery. The boxes, once neat and harmless, now looked like coffins. I ran my hand over the wood, counting them. 12. 12 weekends. 12 people. Each detail was so carefully preserved that it almost felt like reverence. He hadn't killed for impulse. He had done it with purpose. That was what terrified me most. The control, the method, the devotion. It was the same discipline he'd tried to pass on to me, the same patience, the same understanding of fear. I realized that what I had seen as a father's wisdom might have been something much darker, the passing of an inheritance I never asked for. 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. Maybe he saw it as justice, some twisted form of balance the world could never deliver. Maybe he believed the forest demanded sacrifices. I'll never know. But the one thing I couldn't deny was the timeline. The ledger proved everything. The last entries were spaced months apart, slowing down only as his health declined. And the final note, dated just before his death, had 2 words written beneath it: "Final hunt." I sat back against the wall, breathing hard, my pulse echoing in my ears. The pride I used to feel when he called me his son now felt like contamination, like I had inherited something I didn't understand but couldn't wash away. Every time he said, "Good job," maybe he wasn't talking about himself. Maybe he was talking to me, preparing me. The realization twisted in my chest like a blade. The forest, the lessons, the silence, all of it connected now in one straight, merciless line. My father's legacy wasn't just the tools or the land. It was the ritual itself. And as I sat there in that shed, surrounded by the ghosts of his hunts, I felt something even more terrifying than disgust or grief. I felt recognition. For hours I sat on the cold floor, the open boxes forming a circle around me like silent judges. My mind kept twisting itself into knots, trying to find another explanation. Any explanation. That didn't end with the truth staring me in the face. Maybe he was keeping these things as evidence. Maybe he wanted to help the police, to track patterns no one else could see. Maybe these clippings, these objects, were his way of remembering the people the world forgot. That was the story I tried to build, the one that made him human again. But the longer I looked, the harder it was to believe it. Everything was too meticulous, too personal. Each item had been handled with care, wrapped like a gift. Even the stains on the fabric seemed deliberate, preserved. Who does that if not out of ownership, out of memory? I wanted to stop, to close the boxes and bury them deep in the ground. But my hands wouldn't obey. Denial is strange like that. It gives you just enough hope to keep going, even when the truth is already tearing you apart. I kept whispering to myself that it couldn't be true. My father wasn't a monster. He was strict, yes. Cold, sometimes. But he was my father. He taught me how to survive, how to think, how to stay calm under pressure. Monsters don't teach you discipline. They destroy it. That's what I told myself, again and again, until the words lost meaning. And yet, every time I opened a new box, the illusion cracked a little more. Another life, another clipping, Another date that lined up perfectly with one of his successful weekends. I could feel something breaking inside me. The memories I had carried all my life, his laughter, his rare smiles, the warmth of his hand on my shoulder, began to dissolve, replaced by images I didn't want. I started remembering the way he looked at me during the hunts, not as a father looks at a son, but as someone studying, evaluating. Every command, every correction, every moment of silence had a purpose I never understood until now. He hadn't just been teaching me how to hunt, he had been teaching me how to be him. By the time I reached the last box, my body was trembling. There was a part of me that didn't want to open it, as if leaving it closed could keep the truth from completing itself. The wood felt colder than the others, smoother, heavier. I sat there for a while, staring at the latch, my breath uneven. When I finally lifted the lid, I expected more of the same. Another set of objects, another clipping. But this one was different. Inside was a single item wrapped in brown paper. No labels, no notes. Just that neat, deliberate fold I recognized instantly. I unfolded it slowly, and my breath caught. It was a photograph of me. The picture had been taken only a few months before he died. I was standing by my car, looking directly into the lens, unaware that anyone had been watching. My throat tightened as I flipped it over. On the back, written in his sharp, unwavering handwriting, were 3 words: "The final hunt." Beneath it, a date, the weekend after he died. My vision blurred. For a moment, everything around me, the shed, the boxes, the light, dissolved into a dull hum. I tried to think logically, to find another meaning, but there wasn't one. He had planned it. He had chosen me. After all those years of shaping me, preparing me, teaching me how to track, how to stay quiet, how to recognize fear, I had been the final lesson. A strange calm settled over me then, the kind that comes right before panic. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, trying to remember every conversation we'd had in his final days. Was there a hint? A warning? Did he want me to find this? Maybe he had seen something in me. Something he recognized, something he feared. Maybe that's why he stopped before finishing what he started. The forest outside was silent, but I could almost hear it breathing. The trees swayed gently, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. A flicker, a shadow, something that made my pulse quicken. I blinked, and it was gone. Just the wind, I told myself. Just my imagination. But deep down, I knew that the forest had never been just trees. It had always been his world, his altar, his witness. I closed the box and sat there in the half-light, holding the photograph against my chest. The silence felt alive again, wrapping itself around me like a familiar cloak. I thought about his voice, steady and calm, the way he used to whisper, "Good job, son." Now it echoed differently, not praise, but prophecy. And as the last trace of sunlight slipped through the cracks of the shed, I realized that maybe the hunt had never truly ended. Maybe it was only changing hands. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that photograph. The air had turned cold, heavy, almost metallic. Everything around me, the tools, the boxes, the dust, felt like pieces of a puzzle I never agreed to solve. I thought destroying it all might help. That fire could erase what blood had built. So I started tearing pages, breaking wood, scattering the relics across the dirt floor. But with every sound of splintering wood, something inside me fractured too. It hit me then, slow and merciless. My entire life had been a lesson. Every silent stare, every rule, every night in the forest wasn't about hunting animals. It was about learning control. He had trained me to understand fear, to read it, to respect it, not just in prey, but in people. And the more I tried to reject that truth, the more I realized how deeply it lived in me. His voice still echoed inside my mind, calm and steady, reminding me how to breathe, how to move, How to disappear. When the last box shattered, I expected to feel free. Instead, I felt nothing. The emptiness swallowed everything else. I sat among the ruins, surrounded by broken pieces of his life and mine. And for the first time, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I looked at my hands, trembling, covered in dust and ash, and I wondered how much of him was still there, pulsing beneath my skin. That was the real terror. Not what he had done, but what he had left behind. The instincts he planted, the silence I inherited, the part of me that, even now, still felt the pull of the forest calling my name. I told myself I would never go back there, never step under those trees again. But promises made in the daylight mean little when the night comes and the wind carries his voice through the dark. Because some legacies don't die, they wait. If you've made it this far, then maybe this story spoke to something quiet inside you. That space where memory, fear, and understanding meet. That's what this channel is about. Uncovering the things we inherit, without realizing it, the shadows that follow us home. So if these moments meant something to you, take a second to like this video. Not out of habit, but because it tells me you felt that connection too. And if you want to keep exploring stories like this, stories that live between love and mystery, between what's seen and what's remembered, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe and walk with me through the next one. We'll keep peeling back the layers slowly, carefully together. Leave me a sign that you reached the end. Right, I'm still here in the comments. I read every one of them. And it's how I know the story found its place. There's another video waiting right here beside this one. It carries the same heartbeat, different face, same silence. Click and continue with me there. The next story is already calling.